Hi, welcome to my workshop. Today I'll show you how I built the Wilderville Depot by Sidetrack Laser. This is an older kit and I'm building the O-scale version. But I'll be building it to resemble an East Broadtop station. So the colors and the train order board will be different. So when you open the box, you have a lot of bags of parts and some directions. It looks like he had problems with his printer. This shows all the parts that come in this laser cut kit. And these photos show some of the parts. You have the walls and the door trim and the floors and the supports for the decking and the roofing and shingles. We'll start by gluing the walls together. I won't be bracing these walls as it comes with a floor and an inner wall, so I won't be painting the exterior until it's put together. I first joined a side and an end wall and glued them together. I cut some strip wood to go in the corners to help strengthen them, and then I glued a piece in this corner and let it dry. Then once dry, I glued those two walls to the floor, making sure that they were at a 90-degree angle. Then I came back and glued in the other end wall and a corner brace for it. Then I glued in the last wall and clamped everything together. I let it dry like this for a while, and this made for a strong structure, but I wasn't going to stain or paint the outside of it yet. I started working on the interior wall, but I wanted to put a door in it, and I put a door frame and then some chair rail all the way around the office portion. Then I was painting the interior a green color, and I had to mask off the floor because it would be stained later. Then I had to pick a stain color for my floor and the interior of the freight section. So once I stained the floor, I glued the interior wall in place, and then came back and stained the interior of the freight section. Then I cut out the chair rail where it went across the windows and touched up the ends. Then it was time to mix up the paint color for the exterior. I made a couple tests and ran these by the guy I was building this for. And once I got approval, I dry brushed this color over the entire exterior. And then once I was done with that, I put stain over the dry brush paint. And it came out looking like this. Then it was time to paint some of the trim. I used a burnt umber on the door trim and the rafter tails. I brush painted the rafter tails and brackets, and then I airbrushed the door trim and the corner trim. Then I cut out the door and window trim and finished up the edges. I then assembled the door, and the kit came with a straight pin for the doorknob. I then proceeded to glue the corner trim onto the building. And then I started putting the freight doors together to glue them on. But they had a little problem. They sat inside the opening, which wouldn't work for a sliding door. So I cut some plastic trim that would bump them out a little bit. Then I made a track out of plastruck channel. And when I glued the door on and put the track in place, it looked like a sliding door. Then I just used some Tichy hinges as rollers on the sliding door. Next I assembled the windows using liquid PSA to hold the frames and the acetate in place, and then I glued the windows into the openings in the walls. Then I glued the two end rafters in place, and once they were clamped and dried, they would locate the rafter support. So I glued the rafter support in place, and I used some tiny little glue blocks to help hold it. Then I came along and started gluing all of the rafters in place. They had had a slight bit of warpage from painting the ends, but I was able to get most of that out as I was gluing them in place. Next I started working on the roof. I had to position it because I was going to have to cut a second hole in it for the train order board that would be coming through the roof. Then I painted the underside a color that was very close to the burnt umber trim. The roof had scribed lines on it for where to put the shingle rows, so I started gluing down the shingles. After I finished the shingles, I set them aside to dry, and I started working on the platform. You had to glue all of these supports into holes that were in the platform base. It went together pretty well, but those supports were a very soft wood. But I glued them in place, making sure each one was exactly 90 degrees. And then when it was all done, I stained all the supports. Then I came back to the roof now that it was dry and made a hole for the posts that would come through to hold the train order board. I had to make sure it was going to fall in the right place in the office. So then once I was done with that, I started gluing the roof onto the building. I used a tight bond for this, and it would hold it very secure. The kit came with a funny roof ridge assembly that required a gap. The staining was all done on the support, and I tested to see how the building looked sitting on it. And now it was time to put the roof ridge in place. It had 3 pieces with a T section that had to go in the middle. I'm not sure how much I like it. But I moved on to the external rafters, and then I glued and clamped them in place and let them dry. And then came the end rafter supports to be glued on. Now it was time to select a couple stains to put on the roof, and I picked 2 of them and varied it somewhat. And I put a dark stain on that roof ridge that made it look a lot better. Now it was time to start gluing some of the support boards that go on the platform. And then it was time to glue the flooring onto the platform. So I waited it while it was drying. Then there were a lot of fascia boards that had to be glued on all 4 sides. And they came cut to different sizes. So I glued all of them on. Then I applied a couple different stains to the flooring of the platform. And after that had dried, I started working on the posts that were going to support the railing around the platform. I stained the wood first, and then cut them all to size on my Ultimation slicer so that they'd all have a perfectly square cut at the bottom. And once they were glued in place, I glued the railing onto them and stained the railing all the way around the building, as well as the boards that had been attached to the front and the back of the supports. It was time now to start working on the 2 stair assemblies. I used double-sided tape to hold them in place, and they went together pretty quickly. Then I glued a block of wood to the platform to help support them in place. I came back and glued some more support underneath the platform. And at this point the basic structure was pretty much done. And it was time to move on to start doing some details. I drilled holes and installed nut bolt washer castings in all of the boards that went all the way around the building. Then I used a burnt sienna gouache to put rust stains on all the nut bolt washer castings, and then used water and a fine tip brush to streak them. The kit had come with a simple little bench to put on the platform, and I started putting it together after staining the wood. But I had an accident after I was halfway done with it, and I dropped one of my 1, 2, 3 blocks onto it. Oops. I made the signboards. This depot was going to be called Spring Run. And then I went ahead and glued the smoke jack in place. One of the other neat little details the kit came with was a cast metal scale. So I drilled out the axle holes for it, and then assembled it using CA. It took a bit of filing to get everything to fit together, but once it was done, it came out pretty nice. I ended up priming it with a dark gray, and then came back and used a couple of shades to introduce some worn metal and some rust on it. I do love using gouache for rust stains. The next detail that came with the kit was a train order board, and it was very similar to what the East Broadtop used. So I started painting it and then assembling it, and I got all of it mounted onto the post that was going to go through the roof. The one difference was the EBT uses a chain to activate theirs. So I found a small piece of chain in my scrap box and glued that into the control box on the head of this, and then put another small hole in the roof that the chain would go through. Something I like to do if I build a structure that's on a base is dig into my supply of ground up oak leaves and use a watery glue and glue them around the base to give the impression of debris that's been blown around. Now, after drilling the second hole in the roof, it was time to mount the train order board. And then I got some more rusting agents to put rust onto all of the pieces there. Now it was time to start weathering the entire structure, and I like using artist pigments for doing this. It gives you a lot of control over the type of shading you're going to use, and I have a selection of colors that I like using that represent dirt and grime and rust. Then I had gotten a couple replacement benches from Nick and Nora Designs. They were going to replace the crushed bench. So I first airbrushed the ends black. They were supposed to represent wrought iron. And then I stained the wood slats that would go between them. They were a little tricky to assemble, but once I got them together, they came out looking really nice. And if you're wondering about why the window is on the platform side instead of the door as shown on the box, this is the way the guy I'm building it for wanted it. It was more representative of an East Broadtop station. So I just took a couple pictures of it on a platform I have. Overall, I think it was a pretty nice kit, and now it'll be heading off to be placed on his layout. I appreciate you watching and hope you come back for more videos.